Hello and welcome to the series of lectures on Content 1. This is the last mini lecture about teaching grammar and vocabulary. In the last mini lecture, we focused on teaching grammar and vocabulary in terms of aspects of grammar and vocabulary knowledge and some recommendations for the teachers to have effective lessons. It is not helpful to think of grammar as a discrete set of meaningless, decontextualized, and static structures. Nor is it helpful to think of grammar just as prescriptive rules about linguistic form, such as injunctions against splitting infinitives or ending sentences with prepositions. Grammatical structures not only have form, they are also used to express meaning. Semantics in context-appropriate use, pragmatics. Take a look at the pie chart suggested by Freeman. Its shape helps us to make salient that in dealing with the complexity of grammar, three dimensions must concern us: structure or form, semantics or meaning, and the pragmatics conditions governing use. These dimensions, as the graphic below suggests, are not hierarchically arranged as many traditional characterizations of linguistic stature depict. Finally, the arrows connecting one wedge of the pie with another illustrate the interconnectedness of the three dimensions. Thus, a change in any one will have an effect on another wedge. Form. In the wedge of the pie having to do with structure, we have those overt lexical and morphological forms that tells us how a particular grammar structure is constructed and how it is sequenced with other structures in a sentence or a text. With certain structures, it is also important to note that the phonemic or grammatic patterns. Meaning, in the semantic wedge, we deal with what a grammar structure means. Note that a meaning can be lexical, a dictionary definition for instance, or it can be grammatical. For example, the conditional states both a condition and outcome or result. Use. Pragmatics. The study of those relations between language and context that are grammaticalized or encoded in the structure of a language. If you can definitely find ways to make grammar fun and interesting for you and for your students will pick up on grammar usage and structure relatively painlessly. And they will probably even have a lot of fun doing it. Teach grammar in context. One of the most important things to do if you are looking for more interesting ways to teach grammar is to teach it in context. When students see grammar in context first, through a game, a story, an activity, or just frequently hearing it used, it lets their brains work a little bit to intuit the meaning before you formally explain it. That is how we naturally learn a language, by being exposed to it and by picking up on the meaning. It's more engaging. It develops an understanding that is grounded in the context, and it also develops their critical thinking and comprehension skills. Do not over-explain. Even though it is useful to have a quick lesson where you explain the formal name of the grammar pattern and go over its structure and usage, don't over-explain it. The less you can possibly talk about the grammar, and the more you can actually use and practice that grammar, the better. Often, your student's textbook will have explanations of new grammar points. If it is a very complex or advanced point, reading through that explanation and answering any questions can be helpful. A few concrete examples are almost always better. Incorporate grammar into other activities. It is important to introduce various grammar points and topics so that the students have a richer understanding of the mechanism of the language. Games and activities are the perfect time to revisit and emphasize grammar points with very little effort on your part and a lot of fun for the students. Stories are amazing teaching tools too. After reading a story, challenge your student to identify the examples of grammar points that you have recently taught, or to pick out sentence structure and patterns that are used frequently throughout the story. Correct the student's errors. At all proficiency levels, learners produce language that is not exactly the language used by native speakers. Some of the differences are grammatical, while others involve vocabulary selection and mistakes in the selection of language appropriate for different contexts. In responding to student communication, teachers need to be careful not to focus on error correction to the detriment of communication and confidence building. Teachers need to let students know when they are making errors so that they can work on improving. Teachers also need to build students' confidence in their ability to use the language by focusing on the content of their communication rather than the grammatical form. Teachers can use error correction to support language acquisition and avoid using it in ways that undermine students' desire to communicate in the language by taking cues from context. When students are doing structured output activities that focus on development of the new language skills, use error correction to guide them. When students are engaged in communicative activities, correct errors only if they interfere with comprehensibility. Respond using correct forms but without stretching them. The next part is about vocabulary. To be more specific, aspects of vocabulary knowledge. The concept of a word can be defined in various ways, but three significant aspects teachers need to be aware of and focus on are form, meaning, and use. According to Nation, in 2001, the form of a word involves its pronunciation, spoken form, spelling, written form, and any word parts that make up this particular item, such as a prefix, root, or suffix. He also stated that meaning encompasses the way that form and meaning work together. In other words, the concept and what item it refers to, and the associations that come to mind when people think about a specific word or expressions. Use involves the grammatical functions of the word or phrase, collocations that normally go with it, and finally, any constraints on its use in terms of frequency, level, and so on. So, there are some ways of bringing more depth and long-term retention into your teaching, both directly in individual lessons and continuously across longer periods of study. 1. Contextualize new words to aid retention. As with all new language, new words and phrases are most easily retained by students if they are learned through a strong context. When planning lists of words to teach, think of the ways to connect them together. Some groups of words, such as types of food, animals, or jobs, may already fit together nicely as topic-based lists. But when we teach reading or listening lessons, the connections may not be so clear. A good solution for this is to invent a story which includes the words one by one and tell the story in class, pausing as you reach the target words to elicit and drill as you go along. 2. Present meaning before form. This means that the concept of a word or phrase given to the student in a simply worded form is more likely to be understood before the new or unknown word is presented. For each of the words or phrases you teach, think of a simple way of defining or exemplifying its concept. Check that all the students follow what you are describing, and then ask for the specific word in English. If someone in the class knows the word, so much the better. If not, then this is the ideal point for you to give them the word. This meaning to form elicitation technique gives your learners the conceptual information they need before they have access to the word itself. 3. Connect to similar words. Another effective way of generating connections between words is by focusing on collocation. Investigating words that are often found together in high-frequency phrases or chunks of the language can highlight patterns of usage that go way beyond word list and studying words as individual items out of context. 4. Investigate word families. Why teach one word when there are 6 or 7 similar words which come from the same stem? Generating word families with all forms of the word, for example, nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and other phrases and collocations, can clarify when and why we use words with certain endings. Asian for nouns, able for adjectives, live for adverbs, and differentiate similar forms for use by students. 5. Recycle regularly. Finally, revisiting new language, especially new vocabulary, regularly is essential if students are to retain what you teach them. At the end of a week, let students play guessing games to recite newly learned words and phrases. That is the end of Module 6. Thank you for listening.